From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Sweeney Gray. We start in Venezuela, where 4 weeks of campaigning ahead of Venezuela's May 20th elections have officially begun. President Nicolas Maduro, who is seeking re-election, kicked off his election campaign in the state of Bolivar. His campaign events are being attended by massive crowds, with whom his message of a new beginning, great change, and the renewal of the revolution seems to be resonating.
Why support Nicolas Maduro? Because Nicolas Maduro is synonymous with defense, synonymous with protection, with work, with hope. He has come to represent the hope of the Venezuelan people.
What we're seeing here is being replicated in the 22 parishes of Caracas and in all the municipalities of the country. It is the start of our campaign for the people president. It is the people who will carry the voice of President Nicolas Maduro.
There are some issues, we all have them, but I think with the help of the people and the president, we will all get out of this crisis, which is affecting all of us.
After Bolivar, President Maduro moved on to Barinas State, where he promised the crowd that this year, the priority of the revolution would be to bring prosperity, just as last year the people had managed to bring peace after the violent opposition protests.
They waged a war. They threw everything at me, and did I back down? I told you a year ago, in the middle of violent protests that we suffer, vote for the Constituent Assembly, and I'll bring you peace. And peace is what I brought you. Now I tell you, let's all go to vote on May 20th to bring prosperity and economic growth, and I guarantee I will bring you that.
Opposition candidates Henry Falcon and Javier Bertucci are also gearing up for the elections. Bertucci started this Sunday in the state of Yaracuy, and Henry Falcon began on the island of Margarita with fishermen and traders. Bertucci, who is an evangelical pastor running for the Hope for Change Movement Party, has now taken his campaign to Santa Rita in the state of Aragua. He is in third place, according to polls, behind President Maduro and Henry Falcon. And for the latest on the Venezuelan elections, we go now to our Caracas correspondent, Freddie Gillingham.
So presidential campaigning very much in full swing here in Venezuela. It all kicked off yesterday and it will now be running for the next 15 days. Today was no exception. 5 of the presidential candidates included in this year's presidential race were all out in force. 3 of the main front runners were of course out on show in various places around the country. President Nicolas Maduro, at the moment still the main favourite. He was all the way out in Bolivar state, which is the far east of the country. It is a Chavista state. However, in last year's state elections, it was quite a tight call, hence why probably Nicolas Maduro has pinpointed this as a maiden starting point. Henry Falcon, the opposition favourite, the only real opposition candidate running in the race, he was in Caracas campaigning. So far from what we've been seeing, certainly from some of the footage today, but also from some of the pre-campaign events, it does seem to be a little bit of a lackluster support base out on the streets for him. However, he has a huge job on his hand in the fact that he needs to rally so many opposition supporters who have committed to abstention as a result of some of the main opposition parties encouraging this. Finally, Javier Bertucci, he was out in Valencia, the 3rd largest city in Venezuela. So those are 3 of the main candidates who are all out today on the 2nd day of this presidential campaigning leg. It's too early really to say too early really to look at the polls with any real reliability, although I have seen various ones this morning. One I looked at earlier today, it was around 52% for Maduro and only 22% for Falcon, who's the 2nd runner in this race. It is, of course, too early to tell. We have another 14 days of presidential campaigning, so anything can happen. We'll keep you posted in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Freddie, for that report. The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arias has tweeted in response to the announcement that 6 countries might be leaving the UNASUR regional bloc just as Bolivia assumes the bloc's presidency. Arias said that UNASUR is a strategic and diverse process of integration, cooperation, and shared development for the people of South America. He said that those who attack the organization are subordinate to outside interests. The foreign minister also said that UNASUR would be strengthened under the leadership of Bolivia. And Bolivian Foreign Minister Fernando Wanacuni and the current president of UNASUR has said that he has received no confirmation of the intention of some countries to suspend their membership. He adds that he intends to convene a meeting in May.
What they say is that they will stop participating in the corresponding instances as long as the Secretary General is not designated in other pending issues. Those other pending issues are administrative matters, so the word abandon, the word withdrawal, is not here but to leave in suspense the meetings in the instances.
Bolivian President Evo Morales is in Cuba to meet with the island's new president, Miguel Diaz-Canel. During his stay, Morales will also meet with several new authorities elected last week, as well as visit academic and investigation centers to develop new integration projects. In Paraguay, the ruling Colorado Party has won the presidential election with over 99% of the ballots counted. The results point towards another 5 years of conservative neoliberal policies. Mario Abdo Benitez, a 46-year-old former senator, took 46.4% of the vote, according to the country's electoral court. His main rival, Efrain Alegre, a lawyer from the center-left Ghana coalition, was just 4 points behind, with 42.7%. It was the closest result in a presidential election since the end of the dictatorship 29 years ago. But the ruling party has not done so well in the vote for the Senate. With over 97% of the results in, Mario Abdo Benitez's Colorado Party has taken only 17 seats in the Senate. That's 2 less than it had before. The Liberal Party won 13 seats, while its coalition partner for the presidential race, the WASU Front, elected 6 senators, among them the deposed former president, Fernando Lugo. 4 other parties share the remaining 7 seats.
On a day when over 2.5 million Paraguayans cast their ballots, the most common concerns of citizens were the lack of decent education and health services, as well as influence peddling in the judicial system.
We can no longer postpone fundamental changes in the judicial systems and in the social outlook of the government. I think that during the past 5 years, the poor were forgotten, with big businesses getting all the attention.
According to the UN's Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, Paraguay is the country with the least social investment in the region. Voters hope that the majority will be kept in mind when implementing public policies to improve the quality of life.
We need better policies for the people, for those in need, especially when it comes to health and education, which currently are the weakest areas in our country.
With an advantage of 3.7 points over his closest rival, Mario Abdo Benitez was elected president. The former senator and defender of the military dictatorship comes to power as the son of the man who was the private secretary to the dictator Alfredo Stroessner for 35 years.
I have many people to thank for today, but I can't forget my father, who was a great Colorado. This is a tribute to our kids and to future generations.
Paraguay is still waiting to digest the final makeup of the 2 houses of Congress. But what is clear is that the political party that was responsible for the longest dictatorship in South America will now enjoy a new period in the presidency.
We're being joined now from Washington by Mirta Moragas. She's a Paraguayan lawyer and an LGBTI activist. Mirta, thank you so much for joining us. Now tell me, what does the victory or the election of Mario Abdo Benitez mean for social movements, Paraguayan women, and the LGBTI community?
Well, it means a big backlash because, as the report correctly explained, Paraguay is a very conservative country. We face a lot of challenges in terms of women's rights and LGBT rights, For example, in Paraguay, one woman is victim of femicide each week. And also we don't have real public policies regarding sexual rights and reproductive rights. Abortion is penalized almost in each case. And 2 girls give birth every day in Paraguay, and we don't have public policies to address these issues. And there's a lot of problems to have a real discussion about these issues in Paraguay because we have a very conservative society, and also these politicians with a lot of strong statements against LGBT rights and women's rights. And for example, last year on October, the Minister of Education banned the old use of gender theory in education. And this is a very big backlash to Paraguay. So in this context, the winning of Mario Abdo Benitez give us little hope to have a better environment, or at least hope to something better.
Now, I understand that the elected president has said that the sons of single mothers should be drafted into the military I guess the military is supposed to give them the male attention that he seems to feel is very necessary. How do you and other feminist movements plan to address this sort of thinking from the new president? And how difficult is it for women groups and activist groups to actually function in Paraguay with this sort of new conservative thinking?
Those kind of statements are like the best example of what is the mindset of this. It's going to be the mindset of this government, because at the end, he sometimes tries to say that he has democratic credentials, but at the same time, he is vindicated first his father's memory and also the dictatorship itself. So this statement about single mother sons is just one other piece in this big picture of the vindication of militarism, the vindication of a country that has a lot of challenges in terms of discrimination. For example, we don't have a general law against discrimination, so LGBT people and a lot of other people discriminated in Paraguay lack mechanism to make a complaint and to have the redress.
Hello, Meta. Are you hearing me?
And also, for example, say that, yeah.
Okay, so we kind of lost you a little bit, but I wanted to ask you another question. The margin of Abdo's victory was actually one of the smallest we've seen in a presidential election in Paraguay for decades. Does this give greater strength to the opposition and to social movements in Paraguay? Because, you know, there's probably the implication that the people don't support him as much as he thinks they should.
I think that is, we really need still to analyze the result, but I think I have hope in social movement especially, because I think a lot of young people do not support this kind of statement. I think there's, for example, in the last 2 years, we have the biggest demonstrations for women's rights in Paraguay on March 8 and November 25 in Paraguay. So I think at the same time we have this critical mass of people trying to change all these conservative views. So I think it's gonna be there's gonna be a lot of fight. I think human rights movement and women's rights movement and LGBT rights movement are all prepared to face this challenge that this new old government means for us. But I think we are ready to continue fighting, which is something that we have done the entire transition in Paraguay.
Thank you so much, Mirta Moragas, for talking to us. She is a human rights attorney based in Washington. She's a Paraguayan lawyer, actually, and an LGBTI activist. We are going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Several thousand indigenous people are gathering in the Brazilian capital for a week-long camp entitled Free Land. Our correspondent Mia Alberti is there in Brazilia.
The Free Land camp here in Brazilia started just a few hours ago, and all day we've been seeing people from all over the country coming here to the biggest indigenous meeting in Brazil. Now, by the end of today, 3,000 people will be camped out in this field just a few meters away from the government headquarters, and their main claim is land rights. There's a feeling among the people here that this is the worst moment in history for indigenous rights in Brazil, and indeed land grabbing and attacks have been increasing. Now, in the next few days, we can expect a few talks on women activism and youth activism, and on Tuesday and Wednesday there's scheduled protests in front of the Congress and other government buildings. And just one more thing, the place that I'm sitting in right now was actually not the place that the campout was supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen a few further down next to the government headquarters, but just this morning, quite ironically, the authorities told organizations they had to move further up to where we're now and further away from the government headquarters. So a lot more action and activism that we can expect from Brazilia.
Thank you, Mia, for that report. Teachers in Tobago have protested against the poor conditions of schools and the administration of education on the island. They took their complaints to the Division of Education building at Dutch Forest in Scarborough because they say they're being ignored by the Education Secretary. They have a litany of woes which include no salary increases, insufficient benefits and promotions, and no upgrades to school. In fact, one teacher told Telesur that Scarborough Secondary is at great risk of falling into the sea because of coastal erosion and neglect. The Division of Education has responded, saying the teachers' concerns are being addressed. Speaking at a special town hall in London for Trinidad and Tobago nationals living in the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley said he was deeply shocked by the Windrush scandal and the extent to which it has affected English people of Caribbean descent.
We expect that those who are responsible are making significant efforts to have this rectified, and it is more of a problem than they would ever have wanted to have. And I have every confidence that in the end, this issue, there are those who would wish that they never approached you in that way. We are Caribbean people and we are proud people. And as the leader of Trinidad and Tobago, we stand with the rest of the Caribbean on this matter. And we have spoken very forcefully where it mattered, and our position is very well known, and your interests and your rights are being protected.
The UK Labour MP David Lammy has been actively critical of the plight of the Windrush generation, who are UK citizens of Caribbean origin who arrived in the post-war period that are now struggling to prove their legal status as British citizens. His efforts have gained him considerable attention in Britain recently, including a large amount of racial abuse. He shared a letter he received in the mail which in part tells him to be grateful that we've taken you in as a black man and given you a life here. For the record, while both of Lammy's parents were from Guyana, he was actually born in the United Kingdom. And the UK Home Office, which is the department responsible for migration, has announced that members of the Windrush generation who arrived in the UK before 1973 will be granted full citizenship. Home Secretary Amber Rudd made the announcement in the House of Commons. Corruption and security were two of the topics discussed by candidates in the first presidential debate in Mexico.
The presidential elections will be held on July 1st. 5 candidates participated in the debate. According to surveys, Andrés Manuel López Obrador is leading the polls, 20 points ahead of his nearest challenger, Ricardo Anaya. Anaya and José Antonio Meade are battling each other for the second position, while the two independent candidates, Margarita Zavala and Jaime Rodríguez, have less than 10%. López Obrador was the most attacked candidate during the debate.
I will defend you from criminals, from U.S. President Donald Trump, from the abusive political parties, and from the proposals of López Obrador.
During the debate, the candidates verbally attack each other, a total of 46 times.
Here he is with his friend, the former governor Cesar Duarte, who is now a fugitive of justice. The question is, how much piece of that pie did you get?
The security issue is one of the most important for the people. Jaime Rodríguez Calderón, the independent candidate who is last in the polls, had one controversial proposal.
We have to cut off the hands of those who steal. It's that simple. I will present an initiative to Congress. Let's see if the legislators dare to pass it.
The candidate for the coalition, Juntos Haremos Historia, attacked his contenders the least, and instead focused primarily on issues of concern to the electorate.
We are calling on the Mexican people to put honesty first and put pressure on the government to banish corruption.
The topics of security, corruption, and impunity, along with democracy, pluralism, and the protection of vulnerable people were discussed throughout the debate, which lasted 2 hours. During that time, analysts only counted 2 concrete proposals as coming from the candidates.
Violent protests over social security reform in Nicaragua have died down after President Daniel Ortega revoked Resolution 1317. For more information, we go now to our Managua correspondent, Maria Jose Diaz.
It's business as usual now in Nicaragua. But just hours ago, there were still protests and clear population unrest on the streets. The demonstrations have died since President Daniel Ortega announced that pension reform resolution 1317 was being revoked after originally being approved on April 16th. On Monday, there is also a march expected organized by the Private Companies Council. Meanwhile, we await the dialogue between this sector and the government. Church representatives are currently acting as guarantors.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Moscow and Beijing will block any U.S. attempt to sabotage the Iran nuclear deal during bilateral talks in Beijing.
We in China have a united position. This document was approved by the highest organ responsible for maintaining global security, the United Nations Security Council, and to reconsider such agreements is not acceptable. To do so would be an attempt to revise one of the greatest achievements of international diplomacy of recent times. We in the People's Republic of China will do all we can to counteract this. I heard recently that President Macron encouraged the U.S. to not withdraw troops from Syria even when the last terrorist is destroyed or banished from the territory of this country. The French leader said that it's necessary to stay in Syria forever to build a new Syria. It's a colonial stance. We'll clarify with our French partners what they meant, because we were informed until now that the American coalition was working in Syria solely in order to destroy the terrorism threat that comes from ISIL and other organizations which are indicated as terrorists by the UN Security Council. It's a very serious question. We'll work on it.
French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in the United States and was greeted by President Donald Trump, who he is set to meet with at the start of his 3-day visit to the United States. The two leaders are expected to discuss the situation in Syria. Macron will make efforts to sway Trump on climate change policies and free trade. He was seen arriving at the Lincoln Memorial a short time ago. A Saudi-led airstrike has killed at least 20 at a wedding in Yemen, injuring dozens of others, many of whom were children. Hospital staff in Hajj reported that 40 bodies had been received torn into pieces. It was also confirmed today that Salah al-Samad, a top Houthi political leader, was killed in airstrikes over Hadiyah city on Thursday. In Syria, members of Aleppo's Armenian communities gathered on Sunday in a rally marking the 103rd anniversary of the Armenian genocide and condemning the more recent Turkish military action in the region. Participants carried banners and called for the active boycott of Turkish products as they set a pile of Turkish goods on fire. The genocide took place in the Ottoman Empire during and after World War I, and between 600,000 and 1.8 million people are believed to have died during that period. And as we come to the end of this newscast, we're going to end with some music from the start of the election campaign in Venezuela. As President Maduro launched his campaign in Ciudad Bolivar, a group of indigenous musicians played the unofficial anthem of Venezuela. And that brought us right to the end of this news brief. But for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourtv.net/English. You can also join us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Suni Gray. Thank you so much for watching.